Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to the Accursed. Some monsters cling to what remains of their morality by their fingernails. They construct a fantasy surrounding their heinous acts that makes them think that what they're doing is for the betterment of others. They say, with a straight face, "I'm damning myself to save you." They will tell you, "I am drinking this person's soul for the betterment of others." This is the Vorare, a family of the hungry. And their origins couldn't be more diabolical. I mean, by every definition of that word. You hear stories of people being tricked into deals with the devil, making a pact without fully understanding the ramifications of doing so, but not the Vorare. They walked in with their eyes wide open, or at least their family head did, and embraced this infernal deal and all of its repercussions. Costs, benefits, all of them considered and ultimately agreed upon. "You will consume souls for me," said Abaddon, "and I will make you eternal, powerful, and wise." There's conjecture surrounding the origins of the family, as there are with almost all families, but there are certain myths that are repeated again and again, and the Vorare aren't an ancient family, at least not in their current iteration. They trace their origins somewhere in the 18th or 19th century. Namely, a mortal family of powerful mystics and psychics known as the Carsteins. Yes, you probably have heard that name before. Keep a note of it, because it will be coming up again later to some dubious effect. Now, Count Carstein, he was, through mental magic, quite the tyrant, and yet he always convinced himself that the reason he subjugated his people, villagers, and anyone who passed through his lands was to keep them safe. He was deadly afeard of rebellion, of anarchy. He was hearing tales from all over continental Europe of dukes, earls, barons, and counts being brought down by peasants who had gained a taste of democracy. He was terrified of the idea of losing his ancestral position to tumult in the lower ranks of society. And it wasn't just that he was afraid of losing his position, at least according to the Vorare. No, it was that he believed strongly that if the peasants gained the power, they would lack the wisdom to know what to do with it. That every instance he had heard of a lord being dragged down resulted in territories being broken up or invaded by a foreign power. That the people, without a strong central figurehead, were rudderless. And so he needed his people to obey. He needed his people loyal. And when they wouldn't do it willingly, he would get into their minds and force them. Now, what kind of accursed was Count Carstein to be able to do this? I can't say. I can't even say if he is what we would modernly refer to as accursed, but it is generally believed he was quite the mental magician. Still, with all these fears that when peasants bring down their betters, they end up burying themselves in the rubble, too, he decided it was his duty to save the people from themselves. This is a story you will often hear with the Vorare. They are all about saving others, whether it's from themselves or from other creatures, but they believe they are saviors. The thing is, this talk of rebellion, of conflagration, of civil war that was racking the land surrounding Carstein and indeed his own territory was being goaded from within. There were agitators among Carstein's own people. Yes, this is a matter of historical fact, at least if you're friends with some archivists, you'll be able to figure this one out. It wasn't just the waves of democracy, of nascent socialist thought, of anarchy, of the various rebellious attitudes that existed in those centuries that affected his people. So there was a force within that was compelling it. Now, we won't go too far off piste here, but I can tell you, as I say, having checked the records, and you'll like this if you're a fan of the idea of curses being fated, of self-perpetuating loops, of certain players pulling the strings in the background, that a certain sorcerer family known as the Faceless was deeply embedded among Carstein's people, and they were the individuals who were stirring rebellious attitudes that, in turn, resulted in Carstein heading to unfamiliar waters to gain more power. Was this all part of the Faceless' plan? Were they in league with some devil or demon, outsider, fae, what have you? Now that's where the records become hazy, conjecture, but they were most certainly there. Now back to our story. Carstein never felt his power was enough, and so he and his family, his mortal family, sought aid from beyond. According to tale, he ventured down into the dungeons of the Carstein estate. These were ancient. They had existed for hundreds of years, and in times past were the houses of political prisoners, of the greatest criminals in his land. These days they mostly stood empty, except for the occasional imprisoned mystic who the Carsteins wished to experiment on to find out exactly how they ticked. But, importantly, these Carstein dungeons, which exist to this day, were a great resonance point, a locus, if you will, of liminality, misery, grief, torment, and a wonderful space for communing with creatures of the outside. Carstein wished to beseech one of these outsiders for additional power beyond his psychic ability. Luckily, his psychic ability was what was required to make that communion, and the first entity he spoke with was a being of rugged nature and elemental strength. He wasn't interested in being tied to the green or manipulating people through nature, and so he dismissed this entity out of hand, making an enemy for the future. The second that he was able to reach after many days of prayer and sacrifice, ritual and other, was a grotesque being of gears, eyeballs, wings, hundreds of limbs. It drove half of his family mad to behold it. Ultimately, he too looked away. He was unprepared to do a deal with something so overtly monstrous. Another enemy gained. But the third, because these things always come in three, don't they, was exactly what he was after. A beautiful, statuesque, feminine creature. Bronze of skin, healthy to look at, fire in her eyes, and magnificent breasts, thighs, and other parts besides. He was enchanted, maybe magically too. But he felt, this is the entity I need, because there she was offering him anything he sought. All she had to do was enter into a pact with him, and that pact, for 616 souls, I will make you eternal, powerful, and wise. Now, to Carstein, this felt like nothing. For 616 souls, I mean, he would probably sacrifice double that number for eternity, power, and wisdom. And maybe it's true that this devil, this Abaddon, read his mind. The psychic bond was there, after all, and saw that he was so free and easy with the idea of souls that the offer was expanded. An eternity of souls for an eternity for your family. I will extend these gifts to your loved ones, your relatives, your friends, your peers, your subjects, for a constant feed of souls. Now, this was the kind of deal Carstein was after. He was, after all, looking out for his own people, and if he could guarantee them an eternity and power and wisdom, well, this felt like a deal worth making. So, he made the pact. pact. He forged it with Abaddon, and thus the first of our Vorare was created. It felt a small price to pay. But I know what you've heard, and it's 3 flies in this particular ointment, this story. Well, the first, and probably the most popular, is that the Carsteins are fictions of Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla. Not so. Le Fanu had a sponsor, and guess which accursed family that sponsor came from. If I say the word faceless again, maybe you'll start detecting the strings of a conspiracy. The second is perhaps the most subtle. Wasn't Carmilla Carstein in the novel a woman? If so, who was this count? And to confound matters further, are there not tales that the family head of the Vorare is imprisoned currently in an outside realm, perhaps a battleground, and a woman at that? More on that later. Third, and most pressing, if you're hungry, you will certainly be aware of this, the heirs will proudly tell you that their current family head, because the heirs move through family heads with some regularity by Hungary standards, is Carmilla Carstein. For a while, indeed, the heirs were known as the Carsteins. That's right, the heirs. Now, isn't this a conundrum? Does it imply a connection, familial or otherwise, or that one family's mythos is a complete lie? It's known that many Vorare despise the heirs, and the feeling is quite mutual, for the way they brutalize and torment mortals. The Vorare, just to remind you, see themselves as protectors, salvation, sanctuary, that they commit these atrocities so that others might benefit from their sin. The heirs have no such illusion. They do not try and convince others that they are doing good. They believe that their actions speak for themselves, so there's a kind of honesty you have to respect there. The Vorare see the heirs as the exact opposite of their noble aims. Wouldn't it be something if it transpired the two emerged from the same foul seed? In truth, I don't know the answer. What I do know is expecting anything beyond sibling hatred between the heirs and the Vorare is wishful thinking. Today, the Vorare still abide by the maxim of damn myself to protect others. They wholeheartedly believe that their consumption of souls is a necessary evil, that by saving others they might redeem themselves in time to come. Except it's a closed cycle, isn't it? They must commit atrocities to atone for other atrocities. Still, there's nothing quite so fervent as one who believes in their own propaganda, and the Vorare will fight to the point of destruction to protect one to whom they're sworn. This family is a paradox. You might have wondered what becomes of someone once their soul has been consumed. Hell, what becomes of their soul? Well, let's deal with the body first, shall we? It seems if you drain the soul from a host, the body enters a drone-like state. That's the most common symptom. Sometimes the soulless body becomes a mindless vessel, which will still operate on minimum capacity. No real will, no real aspiration, no desire of its own, easily commanded, easily cajoled. You could argue exactly the kind of thing that Count Carstein enjoyed from his subjects. They're easily manipulated. They're common foot soldiers, especially to creatures from the outside who can detect drones easily. They can smell them. They may look dead-eyed and blank-faced, but be warned. Drones can possess a kind of pre-programmed message from their masters. Behind that blank expression might be the order to kill, kill, kill. And they won't think twice about doing so because they never think twice. These soul lobotomies know only the simplest of wishes. I've heard tell that some Vorare go about trying to rejuvenate the souls of said drones. They believe, and I've seen this done on one occasion, that it's possible to snatch a soul and leave part of it, or to put it another way, that it's impossible to snatch a soul in its totality. Like a plant, a soul will grow back, but it requires cultivating. Give that host enough care, attention, and a cause to go on, and it might grow a second soul. What a fascinating concept, something about which the Vorare are experts. Soul magic, the idea of control, rejuvenation, producing souls. There are a lot of Vorare scientists out there who would love to bend your ear about such things. Now, if the person from whom you're soul drinking is already accursed or has been tainted in some way, don't expect some obedient drone to emerge from the process. This is how you end up with flesh-eating zombies that will charge straight at you as soon as their soul is absent. They will try ripping you to pieces and consuming you like an Iscariot. They're tragically common. I've even seen one or two emerge as voids. They almost turn inside out on the spot, becoming the opposite of a soul, a living creature. An inversion of life and will. I know a Vorare by the name of India Connolly. She is a wonderful high school teacher. She once took down a school shooter, I'm told. In fact, I'm not told. I know this. I read about it. She sensed his approach from afar, because the Vorare have pretty good senses in general for people who mean ill on their charges, and she confronted this school shooter right outside the class, and she consumed his soul right there on the spot, before her classroom of pupils. She protected all of them. Now, you might think they would have then gone on to see their school teacher as some kind of monster. Not at all. Remember, this is how the Vorare play their game. They engender loyalty through their heinous acts. Yes, she showed herself to be a monster, but she was their monster. She is their protector. In a sense, this hungry India, she is their angel, a guardian angel. Don't tell the battleground angels about her. They might get jealous that someone actually sees an angel as a good thing. I asked India once about the long-term effects of draining... Well, I'll rewind a little. India is one of these interesting Vorare who claims you don't need to consume an entire soul. In fact, she has a phrase for it. She calls it skimming the cream off the top. That you look for the people with just the right kind of soul and you just skim the cream off the top. Leave the rest intact. And I asked her about the long-term benefits or drawbacks of doing this for the vessel, and she said, well, the person from whom you've fed will probably remain in bed for a couple of weeks. I mean, they might lose certain creative urges and their libido will be shot to hell. Imagine it as time off work, like a bad flu. But that soul will grow back again, and eventually they will be up and facing the world anew. Sounds like having your soul siphoned is a little like taking a new course of strong antidepressants to me. The Vorare should really compare notes with the Black Hearts about such things, because I understand some of their abilities to drain emotions have the same end effect. Oh, before I go, I did say, I asked you to wait on thinking of that woman chained up in an outside realm who may be the family head. And I also said we would talk about what happens to the soul after it's consumed. But remember that original deal. The soul doesn't rest with the Vorare. They are purely siphons. The souls travel to Abaddon, wherever she is. Now let's imagine for a moment that this woman, this Vorare, who is chained up in a battleground labyrinth somewhere, who apparently will offer you wishes if you will just approach her and untie her. Supposedly she will consume the souls of most things that approach, so make sure yours is locked down before you go up to her. Let's assume that she is Abaddon. Let's assume that all the souls that the Vorare are consuming are being funneled through to her. What is she doing with them? we have to guess that souls give some kind of power, but if she is content to be chained to a wall in a permanently shifting labyrinth, is this just all she's ever wanted? Now she no longer needs to leave? I don't know. I genuinely do not know what could compel her, or indeed if she is Abaddon, or if she is the truth behind the Vorare family, and that all this Carstein nonsense is a stolen history taken from the heirs, maybe to make them look worse than they are. I do not know. What I do know is that she is always asking to be freed. I once knew a Vorare. I won't mention his name. He was really quite a wicked soul who mooted the possibility that souls, after being consumed, they just vanish into the ether. They don't end up in some repository. They don't power a great battery. They don't give a monster new powers. No, Abaddon made a deal, 616 souls, and that deal was met over 100 years ago. Everything else is just floating away, maybe becoming phantasms, maybe becoming voids, but otherwise disappearing into the ether. That the Vorare are needlessly consuming these souls, that they already have the benefits of their deal. They don't need to eat anymore, and yet they are fixated with filling their empty stomachs with souls, an appetite that can never be sated. What a delightful thought. I'm feeling hungry all of a sudden.